We just made a perfect matcha latte. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we are going to be talking about the 5 mistakes you could be making when it comes to matcha. And to be honest, I've made every single one of those mistakes, and this is what my matcha lattes used to look like. Very bad. I made all the mistakes possible. I did not know how to properly find the right matcha powders or use the tools or just anything in general. I had a lot of mistakes. So because of that, I want to share what I've learned throughout the years and how I get my matcha lattes to taste amazing and perfect every single time. So let's get into it. I'm gonna also make a matcha latte while I talk through the 5 mistakes. So the first mistake that you could be making is not using the right matcha powder or using a really low quality one. So there are the terms ceremonial and culinary, and although they most likely use that for marketing terms, culinary is typically a lower quality matcha, whereas ceremonial is typically going to be like a higher quality matcha, and a lot of brands will slap that term on their matcha brands in order for it to seem more high quality, just because that's the trending thing to do. As we've seen, like in the industry of matcha, a lot of people have just been putting ceremonial on it. But with that being said, I don't think ceremonial necessarily means it's going to be the best. I've definitely tried brands that say ceremonial matcha, but it had like the quality of a culinary matcha. So all that to say, it is a marketing term, and a lot of brands will use that on their matcha powders to say that it's high quality. So you really need to do your research, and that's something that I really started to do when I got into the matcha journey. I started to look past like the ceremonial like marketing term on their powders, and I really looked at the background of the company, like who is the owner, like what do they care about, and where are they getting their matcha was really important for me to tell if they actually, you know, got it from Japan, got it straight from Japan, like what region, etc. So do your research when it comes to matcha. Don't only look at the ceremonial term, because not all the time will it be that exactly. So that is my little tip for that mistake, just because, yeah, anybody can say that it's ceremonial, anybody can say that it's culinary, but what I like to look for is first harvest, because normally that is the best matcha quality that I've tasted. They're all usually from the first harvest. So that is something that you can look for. But again, I think don't pay attention to the terms too much, but look at the background of the company, like where are they getting the matcha from, and just see, you know, just try and see if you like it. And that's another tip too that I think helps with like that mistake of choosing the wrong matcha powder, is not everybody's recommendations and taste palettes are the same as yours. So what tastes really good to me and what I like may not be what you like. So I think a lot of people assume that, oh, if this person says this matcha is really good and they like the profile of it, that automatically means I'm gonna like it too. And that's just not the case. I think matcha is like something that you yourself, like your personal preferences, like you decide what is good and what you enjoy drinking, because at the end of it all, right, like you're the one who's going to be drinking the matcha, so you want to enjoy it. So today I'm using, I know this is ceremonial blend, but this is truly such a good matcha. I really ignore the ceremonial like label. It doesn't really like make me think, oh, this is gonna be a good one. I kind of just ignore that term, and I really just taste it for what it is. So this one is actually one of my favorite blends. This is from Hawa Matcha. This is their ceremonial blend, and it is amazing, very roasted, which is another note that I personally like. And the second mistake that I've made, and that you may be making too, is not using the right tools. Before, I never used to sift my matcha, and I never had one of these whisks. I just poured the matcha like into a cup that I was using, and I used the electronic frother. And I will say, I don't hate, you know, the electronic frother method, but I definitely think for me it was like the tasting experience wasn't the best compared to doing it like the traditional way of like actually sifting the matcha and like whisking it. made the texture so much smoother compared to what I was doing before, and just overall brought out so much more of the matcha flavor in general. So I typically like to do it this way. Again, if that's all you can do, then I don't think it's horrible. I think you can still enjoy your matcha, but this is a mistake that I did before that affected the way my matchas tasted. The third mistake that I did before was not using the right ratios of water, of matcha, and of milk. So for me, I typically like to use a lot more matcha because I like a stronger flavor and a bolder flavor. So I typically do 2 teaspoons of matcha powder into the bowl, and before I wouldn't even measure. I think I would do like maybe a spoonful of the matcha powder and then a lot of water in there. So a lot of the times like my matcha was really watery and the texture was not what I wanted it to be. So my ratios for my matchas right now are 2 teaspoons of the matcha powder and then about a 1/3 cup of water. I don't use a scale that often, but I can pretty much eyeball it. So yeah, after that, I wouldn't even like whisk it. I didn't own one of these. I just would like electronically froth it, which I think doesn't necessarily like get all the clumps out of the matcha powder as detailed as whisking it this way does. So I do the typical like MW motion and get all of the clumps out till a froth on top forms, which is kind of like your telltale point of it being done. The fourth mistake is not using the right temperature of water to whisk your matcha with. So we know, right, matcha is a really delicate powder, which means if it's too hot, you can burn the matcha, which can alter the taste. So my perfect rate or like range for the temperature is here. I don't go past 175 degrees, and I use 173 degrees pretty much all the time because I found that personally that's my like sweet spot for matcha tasting the best in my opinion. So you can do anything within that range, but don't go past 175 or 176 just because anything past that will definitely burn the matcha and make it taste like fishy or burnt, because I've heard people experience that before. And for me back then, when I didn't know anything about like water temperature, I would just heat up like water in the microwave for like 15 seconds, which is definitely not a lot of time for it to like even heat up. And I would use that to make the matcha. So obviously it didn't bring out any flavor as well. So using a water temperature that's way below that range too can also tamper with like how well the matcha powder tastes and all of like the flavor that the right temperature should bring out. So that's a mistake that I was doing before. And I really like using my temperature control kettle. I think if you are drinking matcha every day, then it's definitely worth investing in a good one, because obviously you want your matcha to taste the best, and the water temperature definitely plays a role in that. Ice to the top. Okay, this is not a mistake necessarily, but I do think that it plays a role in how your matcha latte will end up tasting. So for me, I've tried a lot of different milk brands and milk alternatives to see which one I truly think tastes the best with matcha. And through my research, I personally just do not like almond milk with my matcha lattes or any other one. I think oat milk works the best for it, and specifically the Minor Figures Barista Oat and also the Califia Farms Barista Oat Milk too. Those are the two that I use all the time. I don't use any other brand just because I feel like I've tried a lot of different oat milk brands, and a lot of them either have really weird like artificial tasting flavors or just other flavors in there that I think tamper with the actual matcha flavors, so that when you drink it, you're not really tasting like the matcha for what it tastes like, but you're tasting like the milk itself, if that makes sense. So these I feel like are the most neutral that I've found. So that's just another tip too when you're like drinking your matcha. If you're wondering why you can't taste like the matcha powder so much, it could be the milk that you're using. And another ratio I like to use for the milk is only a half a cup. So I only fill it up to about halfway because I also don't want it to be too milky. See, doesn't that just look perfect? It's perfect. Yeah. So good. Matcha should taste good naturally by itself. So before, I used to have to use so much sugar and like creamers because I was like masking how bad the matcha powder tasted with like sugar stuff, which obviously means like it wasn't a good quality matcha. So me being able to just drink this straight, oh my gosh, look at the color. This is the perfect matcha color. Like, yeah, matcha should be able to be enjoyed by itself. And just like this, a simple matcha latte, I think that's a really telltale sign if you have a good matcha powder, is if you can enjoy it by itself. And if you are using a lot of syrup and it's not because you want to, it's because the matcha powder is so bad that you have to like hide it with the syrups and stuff, I think that is a sign that your matcha is not the best quality and maybe you should start looking for another one. Because I like to use syrups, but it's because I like the way that it tastes, not to hide the matcha powder. If anything, it enhances it, you know? And lastly, the fifth mistake that you could be making is not storing your matcha properly. And for me, that's a mistake that I made very, very, very often, where I would just leave the matcha powder like outside. And where I live, it's very hot and humid, and the environment that you live in will have an effect on the matcha powder because it's such a delicate and fine powder. So if you also live in an area where it's like sunny most of the seasons, or your house gets a lot of sunlight, or your kitchen gets a lot of sunlight, and it's typically like humid in your house, I would suggest putting it in the fridge and storing it in there just so that it can help preserve just the freshness of the matcha powder, because I've done that in the past where I've left it out of the fridge and it was opened and it started to slowly like oxidize, where it would change color and it wouldn't be as green as I once, or like as green as it was when I opened it, and it became like a bit duller, more like the yellow green color that you do not want. So the way that you store it is also really important. So again, if you don't live in a place where it's like super hot and like sunny all the time, then I think you're okay with hiding the matcha in like a cool area. But again, it should not be out in the sunlight, and it should not be in a clear and transparent container. Like, it needs to be in a tin where it's dark so that the matcha doesn't get hit by the sunlight coming in. So that's super important in the way that you store it to help preserve like that freshness and the matcha taste. Kind of gave you guys 5 mistakes and like a little bit more tips, but I just wanted to share that with you guys because maybe you're just making mistakes in your matcha and you just don't realize it, and that's why they're tasting bad. So hopefully this video helps you and that you learned something new from it. And I hope that you get to drink matcha lattes that look this beautiful in 2025. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!